and welcome to Learning Rewired, the podcast brought to you by Headspring, the customer executive development arm of the Financial Times and IE Business School. I'm your host, Thiago Kiwi, and today we have here at the F2 studios corporate philosopher and associate faculty professor Roger Steare for a very interesting conversation about leadership, ethics, and why you need to be aware of the limits of artificial intelligence when it comes to making decisions.
Hi, Thiago. Thank you for inviting me in.
Thank you very much, Roger. Welcome. Roger, please help me set the scene here, right? Ethics is something that perhaps not many people are thinking about all the time. You know, it's not top priority until things go wrong, right? And that's when they call you.
Yeah, sometimes, maybe more often. I quite like them calling me more often, but particularly in business.
Yeah.
Um, I think a lot of business leaders focus on what Peter Drucker said, doing things right.
Mm-hmm.
That's his definition of management. But leadership is about doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people instinctively know what's right, but find it very difficult to explain it or articulate it, which is where the work I do comes in and helps them.
Mm-hmm. And you've been doing this for a while, right?
A long time. So, full time in this space with business leaders since 2002. But my career in ethics and my study of moral philosophy goes back a long way. So I was studying with Bertrand Russell's son, Conrad Russell, at university, and I graduated in 1979. So now your listeners are working out how old I am.
I'm trying. I'm trying. But age is not the point here. So you mentioned something really interesting, which is people usually know what is right, but sometimes they don't know how to articulate that. So to me, one big question is, what is the process that goes behind decision making? How
Mm,
do we as humans,
mm,
or even as business leaders, how do we make decisions?
mm. So there are three broad processes that go on at two speeds. So I'm sure lots of listeners are familiar with Daniel Kahneman's work on thinking fast and slow. We make thousands of decisions a day, but most of them are automated. We really don't think of them. They're going on in our subconscious. But several times a day, if it's a bad day, more than several times a day, we'll have to stop and think about something which we know is a really important decision. And what I help people to understand is that we think at three levels. So there's two speeds, that's the Daniel Kahneman thing, but there are three levels. The first one of everyone will understand is rational thought, making a calculus. So a lot of the decisions that we make in business are around what the Greeks would call logos, logic. It's binary, it's a spreadsheet can help you do it. But in a way, that's the easy bit. The more difficult levels are emotion, and particularly around making the right decision. We have to bring our humanity into that. We have to think about the way our decision is going to affect the people that maybe our customers, our colleagues, the communities we serve. And then the third level, which is very intangible, is intuition. Intuition is, I mean, it's something we're still trying to to really understand and get to grips with. But some neuroscientists and philosophers think it's our way of tapping into the quantum universe, where we have what some people might call a sixth sense
Mm-hmm,
about what
mm-hmm,
is right or wrong.
mm-hmm,
Um, so that's really how I think people make decisions.
mm-hmm,
Most of them are quick, automated, but one or two or three or four big decisions today, every day, are big ones,
mm-hmm,
particularly in terms of the way we relate to other people in our
mm-hmm,
lives or in our
mm-hmm,
working lives.
And how do we use these three elements, rational thought, emotion, and intuition,
Mm.
to make good? And how do we end up also making bad decisions?
Well, I think you've got to be conscious of how you're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of when we are faced with a tough decision, it tends to trigger a fear response, which is fight, flight, or freeze. We need to recognize that raises our levels of anxiety. Um, and that is a good thing because that tells us it's an important decision. But once we can actually start to overcome that fear by working through in a more rational way the various options that are available to us, and to get in touch with our emotional consciousness and ask us how people might feel about the various options that we have. That's one part of it. So we can think about that when we're lying awake at night. We've woken up in the early hours, we're worried about an important business decision, but actually, we make even better decisions when we're working in groups. So, one of the things that Homo sapiens is really good at, and the reason why we dominate our ecosystem, is because we worked out that putting our heads together literally is the way that we can make good decisions. And the best way to do that is to have a difference of views. The more perspectives we can get, the better it is. The more ideas we can get, the more opinions we can get, and ask people to explain why they think that, why they feel it's so important. That is where the magic happens. We do have a problem within the workplace because most workplaces tend to suppress to a greater or lesser extent our willingness to challenge, particularly those in authority,
Mm-hmm.
because we're worried about, if I argue with the boss too much, what's that going to do for my career here? And it's something that bosses, not a word I love, but leaders need to be aware of. So the best leaders I've worked with understand that they have to create that safe space for democratic debate. It's not a democracy,
Mm-hmm.
they'll have the final vote because they've got the power, the
Yeah.
accountability, but they need to create that environment where people feel that they can raise all of the concerns that are important and bring data to the table, bring facts to the table. And I remember something Steve Jobs said a long while time ago is, you know, why do you hire smart people and shut them down?
Mm-hmm.
Words to that
Mm-hmm.
effect.
Mm-hmm.
And great leaders will bring out the diversity of thought and perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
Before then, the group makes a decision by
Right.
consensus.
But of course, you need to strike a balance there, right?
Mm.
Because you can't keep going and going, asking questions or asking everybody's opinion, right? And is there a particular way or particularly structure that you feel is right, or it
Yeah.
hits the right balance, that the right note?
So it's funny you use the word right because in my first book, Ethic Ability, which also has an ebook short version called How to Do What's Right, I use the acronym RIGHT.
Hmm.
So it's 5 questions that you go through, and I'll quickly go through
Hmm.
them. So R stands for rules, and in business we've got loads of rules and processes that we must comply with. But what we're looking at there is, are the rules telling us what we have to do? In which case, there's no real discussion to be had here. We just have to comply,
Hmm.
particularly if it's an external law or regulation. But it may be rules, internal rules. It could be a financial target that we've been set by the chief financial officer. Um, but that's obviously not such a strong rule when perhaps the reputation of the organization is at stake. The I stands for integrity. So, integrity, moral philosophers describe as the sum of all the moral values we believe in. So, moral values are a bit like touchstones. They guide us in the way that we make decisions. And these are moral values like fairness, courage, um, love or compassion. We talked about humanity earlier. And these moral values are really helpful when we ask ourselves, what is the fair thing to do? People start to think, okay, well, I need to think about the balance between winners and losers in this decision. And when it comes to the losers, are we asking them to give up too much? And then we get into a whole different argument about the value of self-sacrifice in human decision making, which obviously in our personal lives is easier because we're talking about friendship. Friends who are true friends will always, consider self-sacrifice, for example. So there is that framework. The G and H stand for good and harm. So when I'm thinking about a decision, who benefits? That's the good, and who's harmed by that decision. So it's closely
Right.
linked to fairness. And the last one, you'll love it here at Headspring and the FT. It's the truth of public opinion. So when the decision, imagine the decision's front page headline news in tomorrow's FT. Would you be comfortable not only with your decision, but the reporter knows how and why you made that decision? And it's actually better to get a decision that people can argue with, but do it with integrity. Get there with integrity.
Mhm.
So you've made the best right decision. And it's a bit like algebra, show your workings. And people will then say, okay, I disagree, but I don't disagree with the integrity of the process.
Mhm. Mhm. So, in considering this framework, bad decisions end up being taken when you're not really thinking about your emotions, not taking consideration rules, not taking consideration integrity, values, what good, right, the harm that it makes, and the truth.
Hmm.
So basically, if I go too far away from this framework, that's how bad decisions
Yes,
tend.
I mean, there are lots of reasons for bad decision making.
Mm,
So, not having a coherent framework is one which you've just
mm,
articulated. The other one is not asking for other people's views.
right.
You know, human decision making, the best human decision making is a social activity, but you don't need nodding dogs. You need people who are actually going to challenge, sometimes
Mm,
challenge for challenge sake. So one of the things I teach is in every decision making group, someone obviously facilitates the discussion,
mhm,
not necessarily the most senior person in the room. Someone else is asked to play the role of devil's advocate,
mhm,
and
mhm,
you can actually have a baseball cap made with red baseball cap and with devil's horns on it, and they
mhm,
put the cap on, and that's the role they play, is to
mhm,
argue for argument's sake, to stress test the decision,
mm,
to overcome the chance of groupthink, which is
mhm,
very
mhm,
common in
mhm,
businesses.
mhm,
And then the third role is observer. So the job of the observer is to participate, but to feed back to the team how they made the decision, whether or not they followed the process they said that they wanted to follow, whether people spoke up, and so on and so forth. It's almost like a hot debrief in the military. So the military, when you have a training exercise or in real combat, when you come back to base,
mm,
you actually have a hot debrief and said what went well, what could we do better next time.
mhm, mhm, mhm.
And that's often doesn't happen in at the end of business
No.
decision making
Mhm.
meetings.
And sometimes it's not even because they don't want these things to happen. It's perhaps it's
There's no
time,
there's no time.
constraints, and
Absolutely. And
limitation.
so, I mean, you just mentioned something really important here, Tiago, which is that, I mean, too many people working today waste so much time in processes that are not necessary. They're inefficient, and they don't understand the importance of some decisions that have to be made.
Mhm,
And then it's the role of the leader to carve out enough time to make those important decisions. Again, I've been working with boards and C-suite teams, what we tend to do is to carve out that time. We ask people to submit papers which have an A4 single side summary
mhm,
and no more than 3 sides of additional
mhm,
information if
mhm,
we need
mhm,
it.
mhm.
Some boards have board packs of two, three, 400 papers.
Wow.
If you get it the day before the board meeting, there is no way you're going to really be able to read and ingest what's
Mm,
going on. You may not
mhm,
see the wood for the trees. So it's about creating enough time for the most important decisions
mhm,
and taking out some of the inefficient time wasting activities that
mhm.
so many of us love or
Yeah.
hate. Maybe it's a love hate relationship.
Yeah, exactly. And that the question of time also brings us into a very contemporary issue, which is one of the topics of this conversation today, which is artificial intelligence. Right, we're
Mm,
seeing businesses making decisions increasingly based on AI or using AI technology, AI systems to make decisions, whether it's an investment decision, whether is perhaps even a marketing decision, a business decision, a people related decision. So um, we I understand that you have done a lot of work recently with AI, right? You have your moral DNA, what can I call it, a framework or a system?
It's a diagnostic tool. So yeah, so we've there are two issues here,
Mhm,
Tiago. One is, if you like, the way to open the discussion, which we've done with the FT Future of AI Summit, is to look at how the various large language models, the chatbots, their reasoning processes, which are basically mathematical probabilities around one letter, one word following another in
mhm,
sequence. Very clever, very sophisticated um, at the design level. But we've asked them to complete moral DNA, which people can do.
mhm,
And we've got the results. So, moral DNA measures our preferences around making moral decisions based on three perspectives, which we've touched on. The first one we call people, which is what is the impact of our actions on other people, and that's driven by an emotional response. The second one is we call values. So, what are the other moral values that are important to help us make a decision, such as fairness or courage? And then the third one is compliance with the rules. Now, if you have a digital machine, which is what an AI is, compliance with the rules is in a way the easy one,
mhm,
because they can look at literally tens of thousands of rules and regulations and tell you what you can or cannot do
mhm,
in a situation if it's been fed the right data. However, and not surprisingly, they score really highly on that, the moral DNA.
mm,
They score close to human levels when it comes to making values based decisions, but we need to do some more work on that because I'm not sure that's really what's going on there. What is striking is how low the scores are for thinking about the impact of the decisions on the well being of human beings. And one of the models, I'm not going to name it, but one of the models had a score for rules of 99 percentiles in terms of its preference and only 1% for consideration of good outcomes for
mm,
human beings,
mm.
which is a bit of a doomsday scenario for science fiction
Yeah.
fans.
But it's interesting as well because I've seen the graphs and I've seen your how each one of those systems compare to each other and also compare to humans. But there's also a difference between humans themselves, right? There's the Tiago or the Roger
Hmm.
sitting at home, relaxed, and at that point, Tiago or Roger is thinking, he's more relaxed. He's thinking more about people, thinking more about well-being, thinking more about values, and thinking about rules, right? At a certain level. When it comes to Tiago or Roger at work,
Mm.
or when it comes to humans at work, those things change, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so our baseline, which is our 50th percentile, is a balance because that's our baseline. So it has to be 50 percentile. So people, values, and rules are all in the same line. But when Homo sapiens, when people come to work, um, a similar thing happens to the AI. So rules become far more important, and the consideration of our decisions on other people is suppressed. It's not as marked as AI, but it is there and it's strong. And in our research, 48% of people put rules as more important than good outcomes for other people in their decision making at work. Nearly half.
Mhm.
And that's why we think a lot of business decisions are poorly made because people think they're doing the right thing by simply following the rules. Um, that only works in totalitarian states like North Korea, and where if you don't follow the law, you could be put in a gulag or
Mm,
worse.
mm,
Unfortunately, working in a corporation is different from making personal decisions with your family and friends in society. The corporation is a what we would technically called a post-medieval feudal construct. So the design is the same as society was in the 17th century.
Mhm.
So very few of us get to elect our CEOs and our team leader. Um, they're just appointed by people with the money
Mhm.
who own the business, and that's why it's different.
Mhm. And how about values? When it comes
Yeah,
to being in the workplace, what how much how much consideration do people have for
yeah,
values?
more so. So it's the same or even a bit higher at work because I think there's something going on. If the rule doesn't tell you what's right, you really have to think about it. And people tend to focus on values like fairness, which is feels like more of a calculus than feelings, which drives our consideration of good outcomes for other people. So I think that's what's going on there. But there's a lot of scope for more research there. But we've certainly seen that in our results. And in fact, the more senior people are within an organization, what tends to happen is the consideration of people, the score drops and drops,
Mhm.
but also the rule compliance drops,
Mhm.
but the values based decision making increases. So it's a fascinating exercise, and we've profiled some pretty big organizations looking at mapping that across the organization, looking for what we call sweet spots and hot spots in the
Mhm.
culture.
Mhm.
So a sweet spot is where that fear factor isn't very strong and people are making good decisions for customers and colleagues, etc. A hotspot is where you've got what I call a misleader making poor decisions, perhaps for their own financial benefit, but other
Mhm.
people are suffering,
Mhm.
customers, colleagues, etc.
Mhm. So how do we solve that? We because if humans, Homo sapiens, come into work and they are thinking more about rules than people, and they're thinking more perhaps about values than outcomes for people, shouldn't perhaps organizations start thinking about crafting the rules and crafting their values in a way that it's a little bit more considerate of people. So then,
Mm.
even if you're following the rules, if you're sticking just by the rules, and if you're sticking just by the values of the organization, you are still taking people into
Yeah,
consideration.
that's a good point.
Mm.
And certainly in financial services, the UK Financial Conduct Authority had a program called Treating Customers Fairly, um, which is a judgment call based on values. But a lot of compliance and risk teams and even the regulator themselves turned it into a rational spreadsheet
Mm.
process, which has a little bit of value, but not as much value as actually talking to your customers and saying, do you feel this product is fairly designed and fairly sold?
Mm.
And in the answer of payment protection insurance, the answer was no in most cases, and it cost the industry £25 billion sterling to
Mm.
settle those mis-selling claims.
Considering the fact that AI systems are taking rules more in consideration than they take people in consideration, can you trust
Mm.
AI to help us make decisions? Can business leaders really trust and invest a lot of money and put a lot of effort in ensuring that decision making is very logical, very AI driven? Um, is that something that organizations should be doing a lot, and what is the limit of that?
Mm. So, a great question. So, should we trust any technology
Mm.
to be infallible? And the answer is no. If the answer was yes, we wouldn't accept that computers never fail
Mhm.
and they break down on a regular basis. So, I think with AI systems, they need to be properly tested in the real world, and we need to implement them in phases and keep testing.
Mhm.
But they do have, even though I'm not a huge fan of the way they're being implemented now, I think people thinking they're going to get a 20% increase in productivity are fantasists.
Mm.
I mean, Goldman Sachs and the economists reckon at best it'll be a 5% increase in productivity.
Mm.
But they can take the grunt work out of decision making. they can uh, they can eat huge databases and sense and make, find patterns in that which will help us, because the human mind just isn't capable of doing that. We
Hmm.
could, but it would take us 100 years to do what a great AI could
Yeah.
do in seconds.
Hmm. You just spent the last couple of days at the Financial Times Future of AI Summit, right?
Mm.
And you delivered a very, very interesting session precisely on this, talking about the results of your research on moral DNA and on the moral DNA of AI systems. What are your main takeaways? Where's this industry going? And you had a chance to speak to a lot of AI
Yeah,
leaders, investors,
yeah.
developers. What do you make out of all of this?
So, um, I didn't know what to expect before I came in. I was open-minded, and I think, remaining sense of it is I actually feel very positive, not because of any particular AI design or large language model design, but because of the people I met. And the people I met are hungry to understand how they need to make good decisions, the right decisions about the design and deployment of AI, large language models in particular, which is our area of interest, in their businesses. And I was hugely comforted by that. So the easy thing, in a way, was for us to measure and assess the moral reasoning power of large language models, which was a bit scary. 0 or 1% on people is a bit scary. But actually, it was more about how do we, as fellow human beings in business, make the best of what could be an amazing technology. But let's keep grounded on this. It's not going to make the world,
Mhm,
it's not going to solve all the world's problems overnight. There are bigger things that we need to be worried about
mhm,
at the moment. Um, but it's just like the knife, and you saw me use the analogy of a flint knife blade. A knife is not good or bad; it's a tool. It depends on how we use it. We
mhm,
can use it to prepare food. We can use it to hurt or kill someone, um, but it has no moral agency. AI, large language models, have no moral agency. It's down to us, it's on us how we choose to use
mhm,
it. And that's where we need to think slowly and carefully and argue about it in a positive,
mhm,
fun way.
mhm. And if there is one piece of advice or something that you wish people knew about AI when working with these systems,
Mm,
what is it that you would just make sure that everybody's aware when going on ChatGPT, for
yeah,
example, to make a decision, or perhaps just letting, let's say, one of their systems that they use to make a decision for themselves? What do you wish people knew?
I the first thing I'd say is people need to understand that it's not a being.
Mm,
That ChatGPT is not a robot that can laugh and tell jokes
mm,
and all the rest of it. It's just a bunch of code running through wires and chips
mm,
and being cooled by liters and liters of water. So think people need to understand how it works, and there are easy to understand videos on YouTube and so on to help you do that. Not to get carried away by the new shiny toy syndrome.
mhm,
Not to, as I say, not to think it's a being. Um, and to talk about safe ways of using it, which can increase productivity,
mhm,
do the grunt work we're not very good at because our minds are not designed for it. Um, but realize that our humanity still needs to be the most important element of the decision making we have to do.
mm,
I love Steve Jobs' analogy of technology. He said, um, before the bicycle was invented, we could walk. When we invented the bicycle, through gearing and the simple physics of gearing, enabled us to cycle along at 5, 10 times the speed we could walk with the same energy. That's what good technology can do for
mhm,
us.
mhm,
But we still have to ride the bike. We still have to be in control of it, and realizes
mm.
that the bike is not our best friend.
Exactly.
It's a technology.
Yeah. I remember one of the outcomes or one of the comments in the session today was AI doesn't come with a manual, a
Absolutely.
manual or instructions.
No.
People are just given this tool,
Yeah.
and it's up for organizations, is up to leaders to ensure their workforce understands the challenges, the risks, the opportunities that come with AI, but also how to use it in a way that's productive, that's going to enhance
Mm.
the way they operate, rather than create more trouble or drive the company
Yeah.
into problems.
I think that's a great point, Tiago. I think the thing for me is that AI, like any technology, can be used for good or ill, and we need to treat it like any machine tool that can, manufacture things far faster than we could. But if we put our hand in the wrong part of the machinery, we're going to lose our hand. It doesn't care, and so it has potential, but be very careful. Go slowly. Make sure it's proven. Keep checking,
Yeah,
but have fun doing
yeah,
it.
exactly, precisely. Roger, thank you very much for being with us today. It's been a very interesting conversation, and I'm sure we could spend a few hours talking about this. But well, to our listeners, if you'd like to go deeper into these topics, follow Roger on LinkedIn, Roger Steare, and also follow Headspring on LinkedIn. Visit our website. It's headspringexecutive.com. And if you found this conversation helpful, feel free to share, to like, to send this podcast to your colleagues, to your boss, or to the CEO of your organization. So thank you very much, everyone, and see you next time.
Thank you.